So I'd lost thousands of games, right? When I get to that draw, it was by accident from my opponent, in which they were playing blindfold. Go figure. It's not really much of a victory when your opponent, accidentally makes a mistake, but they weren't, looking at the board. But for me, it was obviously about winning the game and trying to figure out what it was that was causing me not.
I'm Chris Hausworth, a grain originator and accountant living in Pocahontas, Iowa, and you are listening to the Vance Crow Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. Today we do part 3 of the Mind of the Child series, where we explore how is it that children learn and what's going on in that inner dialogue as they try and figure out how to navigate this world. Today we have Jonathan Singler in to talk about the game of chess. Jonathan teaches kids how to play chess and how to improve their game. But not only that, he is getting his PhD at Webster University, where he's learning how to teach educators how to teach children to play the game of chess. Webster University is an extraordinary program that's located here in St. Louis because they have what's called the SPICE program, the Susan Pulgar Center for Chess Excellence. This SPICE program has produced some of the best chess teams in the entire world right here in Little St. Louis, Missouri. And I had Jonathan in because they are preparing to hold the Spice Cup Open right here in St. Louis, where people can play some of the best chess players in all of the world and see how you stack up against them. If you're interested, the tournament starts on December 18th, and just Google Spice Cup and you can find out how to register. We're going to head to the interview with Jonathan in just a moment, but a couple of quick notes. We are getting the last of the legacy interviews in that we can before the Christmas holiday. So if you're interested in having us sit down with your loved one to capture their family stories about their childhood, their career, their marriage, the parenting that they did, and the legacy that they want to leave behind, head to legacyinterviews.com to book your interview so we can have it back to you in time to watch over the holidays. The other note I wanted to make is I've updated my speaking list for talks that I'm giving in the upcoming season. And this year, I'm looking forward to doing some really interesting new talks. One of them is how to tell family stories that will last 200 years. Many of you are involved in organizations that think about the longevity of the organization and how to be a part of family businesses. This talk encompasses how to tell stories that last and pass down values that matter to you. Other talks include subjects like how to explain Bitcoin so that people that might not be interested in buying the technology still understand what the technology is all about. If you're interested in looking up some of the new talks that I'll be giving, you can go to vancecrow.com to find out more. All right, without further ado, let's head to the interview with my new friend, Jonathan Singler. Jonathan Singler, welcome to the podcast. So at what age should a person that wants their child to be really good at chess, what age should they start working with their kid?
Do you want the parent answer or the more research-based answer?
Whichever.
So as far as teaching kids with chess, especially children, we're seeing that children have the capacity for chess at, say, the ages of 3 and 4. But what does that look like, right? So when we think about chess, we're obviously thinking about masters, very complex positions and such. But, for children, the ability to just like identify a piece, even just recognize, it's sort of individuated as its own self, being able to move, right, is sort of leaps and bounds, right, for learning. And so, research has kind of talked about 3-4 years old. You might see this usually in like early childhood or early year skills type programs. The International Chess Federation even has like some certifications for that area. But I think once they're about 5 and 6, I think you really start getting more of that engagement back and forth with the child, which is where you're able to work on maybe literacy a little bit earlier, say than first grade, and actually seeing some of that creativity with their reasoning and how they're moving and their interaction and relationship with the game, I think comes out a little bit more than say at 3 and 4. But yeah.
Well, it seems like, when somebody's really into chess, they want to teach their child as early as possible because they know like it was really easy for you to get a lot better at first and then it kind of levels off. And I think like when you think about a little child, you're like, ah, this child can learn at an exponential rate. You work with kids to learn chess. What age does somebody like you start engaging with kids?
Well, the youngest that I've engaged with has been 4, 4 and 5. I think the majority of my students that are that young are actually in the 5 to 6 year old range because they're getting into kindergarten. School might have a after school chess program, and so of course the parents are like, hey, I want my kid to jump on this because chess makes kids smart, and we want them to beat the fifth graders as soon as possible. And it's a very tall glass to kind of drink as a coach because, you know, from whether you're a 15 or 1600 player, which is considered amateur, or you're a grandmaster at the top level, there's a lot of factors that go into your development as in chess, and so usually for children that are that young, I'm much more focused on the literacy part. And it's because I want to be able to have that exchange of chess language. So being able to speak chess, being able to write chess, because first off, this will translate into like their education learning. But more importantly, I want to develop in them the abilities to pursue chess on their own, right? Coaching is one aspect. It's like 10% of the work of for them to attain the mastery. And mastery is possible without a coach too. It's just you have to kind of figure it out for yourself. And for children, because they don't really have that sense of direction, um, they need structure. As far as like when studying and things to kind of make some progress. The one thing I think that's critical with it is for the children not to be limited, right, to say chess knowledge or their creativity or motivation in the game. And children are much more capable than we realize. So I think as soon as we can embark on that language exchange, it then becomes a conversation over the board rather than just here's a rook and pawn end game, and this is what I want you to do. So
Now, when you say chess literacy, you mean being able to name all the pieces and know what the difference between rank and file is on the board, that kind of thing?
sure. I think, well, maybe this is bad from a business model perspective of trying to get the chess student as many resources as they possibly can to sort of put you out of a job at some point as a coach. They need somebody better or maybe a different type of coach. But yeah, learning how the pieces move, but really being able to converse through the game. So, for example, one of my 7-year-old students currently just turned 7. Actually, he's plays online. He's grown about 400 rating points in the past 3 months, which is a leap, right, from where he was. And we focus mainly on the literacy, like notation, being able to uh, annotate, which is if you could imagine, a chess game, you're writing down your moves, right? Or if you're playing online, the moves are there for you. Annotation is sort of the goal for me, at least as early as possible with them, because I want the students to be able to not only look over their game after they finish, right? Whether they won or lost, the result, I'm not interested in. I'm interested in how did you go from point A to point Z in this? And now when you annotate, it's the comments in between those moves that they're writing. It's kind of like journalism a little bit. Well, at 4 and 5 years old, that's very difficult for children to do. Once they get, to first grade, about 7 and 8 years old, it flourishes a little bit more. They're writing sentences. Well, they can at least communicate what they're thinking, And as a coach, I think it's really important to allow them to have their own voice with their games because in order for a coach, I believe, to help that student progress, that child, you really need to help them maybe learn that they are their own person in this process. They're the only ones sitting at the board making the decisions. They're the only ones that are processing their emotions. And so by getting them the ability to even just write a few words on, say on move 5, they played knight to e5 and they basically wrote, I was happy. I was winning.
Man, this is fascinating. So like I remember when I was studying chess at like a slightly deeper level and I had to do the knight to e7 and it was so difficult for me. But if you learned that as a natural language, just like reading music, I'm sure that you can actually just kind of see it and you could read that game. That's one thing that's like a level of skill, but to be able to get them to then jump in on their own inner monologue That's incredibly powerful because there are full on adults that aren't capable of understanding there's a voice inside of my head or these are the emotions that are happening.
Sure. I mean, chess is, well, so chess is about relationships first and foremost. And it's a relationship between the pawns and the pieces, right? They coordinate together. Well, then it's also about the relationships between that and the squares that they're on, and then it's a relationship between you and your opponent's ideas. But chess is a very, isolating, individualized game, right? It's conversation with yourself, and I think that's something that's missed. And so, with children, it's much more difficult, right, to pull out the language because their language isn't as adept as yours or mine after, having life experience and, what comes with furthering your education. With the adults, it's interesting that I was just talking to a colleague about this last night. Some different modalities between teaching adults and teaching children, and I use the same methods the same methods or tools for the adults and the children, but how you go about it is a little bit different. So for children, you know, children are more adept with technology now than ever before. They can navigate websites like chess.com and Lee Chess. And so on Lee Chess, I'm able to create a study for the children. They know how to click, 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 get to it. They know how to import their game from Lee Chess or another website, and they know how to go in and add comments, right? Which is incredible because there's a huge skill set in that for them to be able to do it for themselves without me. So when it comes to the adults are obviously capable of those things, but what tends to be holding the adults back in this process, using this like sort of journalism, cathartic type process for the to hear the voice that's going on in you. Um, it's very easy to use chess as a tool for escapism. I have my own backstory with that, and um, you can kind of just disappear in it, right? You're focused on the game, you're just looking at the moves. But what ends up happening, at least for myself, that I've seen and some of my students recently in tournaments, is that you're sitting there, you're under time pressure, you have a lot of thoughts going through your mind. You're like, okay, you know, maybe my opponent just made a what looks like to be a blunder, but is it a trap? And so you're thinking about that. You're worried about the time. Maybe you're like, oh gosh, I got to go pick up the kids, at 6 o'clock. Oh, I'm looking at the time now. It's 4:30. The game's probably going to take another 2 hours. Like, so I got to hurry this up. So I need to find a quick variation to get out of this. So you start having all of this monologue, and it's like, it is very loud, in such a quiet moment where you're in a playing hall and it's all you're hearing are clicks and writing and maybe a checkmate or a good game here and there. And so it seems like with the adults you're able to get deeper in a way, and obviously it's a very vulnerable process, right? There's a lot of trust involved, there's a lot of transparency, and it takes time, right, to develop that. I've had students who are like, hey, I'm not comfortable with this yet, and it's like, great, so can you
It's
do
not
this for
obvious to
yourself?
me where the trust comes in that you're talking about. What do they have to
So we're
trust?
so the trust or the vulnerability, if I were to say, Vance, as you're playing this chess game, like, what are you thinking about? And you're like, well, I'm thinking about this move, this move. I'm like, no, no, no. Are you having thoughts outside of this chess game, that are kind of coming in and distracting you from the game? Say it was a critical moment, and you made the blunder and then you got flustered and you resigned. And, when I ask you as a coach, like, how did your game go? You're like, oh, I had a good game and I just blundered it away. Well, what should my question be? It should be, well, why? Why did that happen? And how were you feeling? What were you thinking? Clearly, you're frustrated. And as you dig a little bit deeper, you start finding that chess players have this voice, as they're playing the game. And sometimes it's about chess, sometimes it's not. I think that might be a little bit of a difference between players at the top level versus maybe some amateurs, but doing that sort of journalism process in our training games or even part of that annotation, right? Going back over your game and saying, okay, I saw this in this position, etc. And when they played this move, I was worried. Well, there's a very key word there, right? Worried. You had an emotional reaction to something, in front of you. You're playing a game and you have this reaction or this emotional feeling that probably impacted your thought process moving forward. So how long did that, go through? Was it for two or three moves? How did it impact you, say, developing a piece to get some more initiative on the board, to create an attack versus getting worried about your king safety and quickly castling and missing the only opportunity you had to come back. So that's what I mean by that, monologue, a little bit of that, journalism within the game to, at least for me as a coach, to understand what my players are going through.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking in my own mind, like when I was a child, what other relationship did I have where somebody wanted to know about my inner monologue? And the only comparison I can make, it wasn't sports, which I played a lot of. It was when I was really into being in nature and outdoors, and I was in Boy Scouts, and I had somebody teaching me like how to keep yourself calm so that you could observe other things. But it wasn't really like talking about my emotions. I don't think I did that until well into my, like, maybe near my 20s or something like that.
Well, I think that comes with a bit of how chess is taught, right? So chess usually, either as a coach or a teacher, like within a school, when children are learning chess, it's usually for the purpose of improving, right, your technical skill in the game. Well, what's the purpose of improving your technical skill? It's to, use it, to perform, to test it, right? Test your mettle, in an arena against other people who, at least from all outside, perspectives, chess is quite an equalizing game. It's where you're able to have a 5-year-old, 6-year-old who has shown great promise, in the game at a young age through really great coaching and maybe some innate ability and deliberate practice, where they take down a 60-year-old, like a whole like David and Goliath type, story. And of course the world is just, they love stories like that, right? Sort of the small guy, taking out the big guy. Um, and so it's such an equalizing game, but what's not really equal is the process or the journey, that the players are experiencing in that game. And there's so many other factors I think that it impacts that could probably be captured, where we're very focused. When I say we, I mean the field of chess, right? And then of course outside of that fishbowl, the world, we're very interested in looking at chess as this very cerebral, cognitive, engaging, intellectual
Yeah,
game.
it's very much presented as like you're good at chess, then you're probably smart, right? Like, or you're
Well,
strategic or something.
yeah. So if I were to ask you, who do you think of when you think of a chess player, and what sort of qualities do you think a chess player has?
I was so formed by that movie Searching for Bobby
Yes.
Fischer that
Yes.
I have that image is what comes to mind. And then, the person I played the most chess with is my father-in-law. He's exceptionally strategic and like always just a step ahead, just like one tiny step. So I do think of it as a very strategic thing, but also like intelligence, right? It seems like an equal sign between those two things.
It does. So I have probably one of the more unpopular opinions about chess, and I think it comes from a mix between, uh, that maybe the social cultural perspective of chess, right? I mean, chess is a very cultural game outside the U.S. I think in the U.S. we have about, with the U.S. Chess Federation, the national governing body of competitive chess, we have, I think, around maybe 100,000 members. It fluctuates month to month. About 50,000, maybe 48 to 52%, somewhere in there, are scholastic, so K through 12. The rest are, adults. But if you go to, other countries, there's hundreds of thousands, of people who are playing chess, a much larger population from a competitive, standpoint, where it's been embedded historically within their culture. The idea of like chess and intelligence, there's a really interesting study. I think it was called "Does Chess Need Intelligence?" And to give a little backstory, I guess maybe about some chess research. One of the guys who developed the IQ test, Alfred Binet, and I think there's a couple other researchers with some different models of it in the late 1800s, was very interested, in sort of defining what intelligence is. We flash forward another 130 years. Now we're like, okay, it's not just cognitive intelligence, it's like emotional intelligence, right? Or other areas that intelligence could be shown or demonstrated in that maybe is not in the realm of test taking, okay, or academic performance. So, how does this relate back to chess? Well, Binet was very interested in chess players' ability to play at a very high level, more specifically to how chess masters could play blindfolded and recall positions on a board and so forth. So at this time, chess research is kind of beginning. And this is, we're going into the early 1900s. So chess players at that time, their feats of making money was not just from tournament play, but more of sort of putting on magic shows, right? Which would be, hey, let me play five people blindfolded, or let me do a simul, which is where you walk around the room and play 30 people and you just destroy them on the board, right? And obviously from a skill gap, right? It's probably more than likely. So if I were to say, face one of the top 30 or 40 players in the world in a simul, it doesn't matter if there's 100 players in the room. It's one game, one game, one game, one game, one game, right? And odds are they're probably playing, theory that they know. So the study started pointing towards intelligence and this idea that memory and pattern recognition were two of the qualities that were allowing chess players to perform at a very high level. We look at research crossing through the 1900s. Research really hasn't changed regarding that. In fact, it's sort of improved in the sense of, some studies, I think 1973, which was about chess skill, going back to the intelligence, and what was sort of needed to obtain mastery. So we start looking at some of those 10,000 hour rules that we hear about where, if you spend 10,000 hours, in an area, you should be an expert of that area. Well, we also have seen research that, suggests it can be less, it can be more. What kind of depends is the context of that practice. And so the range for chess players, not only was it from 10,000 to 50,000 hours, as far as a range to develop mastery in it, um, it included approximately about 50,000 chunks of information, pattern recognition. So if I were to show you one position, maybe it's a famous game, as an amateur player, you'd be like, oh yes, this was, the game of Nigel Short and, Tillman, where, Short plays this h3 to h4 pawn move, black plays h5, and then white just moves their king over the next 6 or 7 moves, just walks it up the board. And in the position, everything was locked down. And the only really real path to convert the game was the king needed to be up here for checkmate because all the other pieces were in the proper place. So as going back to pattern recognition and checking, we can either recall master games or maybe theoretical positions of rook and pawn endgames to, convert our games. So those two abilities, memory recall, pattern recognition, and obviously some deliberate practice, allows you to perform at a high level. Well, I have a question. Is that really what intelligence is? Is it just pattern recognition and memory recall? Well, a lot of our education system in the US, is focused on pattern recognition and memory recall for test taking. So, depending on how some of these studies are developed, the design of them, the methods, and the findings, it's good for business to conduct research that, highlights maybe some benefits to playing chess, intelligence, academic performance in children in K through 12 who experience chess programming versus maybe students who didn't receive chess programming. But this is the unpopular opinion on the intelligence part, which is there's plenty of studies that have with, up to 5,000 participants in this study where there's a lack of causative findings that it's chess that is improving intelligence. So going back to does chess need intelligence? The question really is, well, is chess increasing intelligence? We know there's complex cognitive processes involved, but so is music, so are sports, right? I mean, look at football, very complex plays, there's a lot of psychology involved, in the moment, very quick decision making, pattern recognition, memory recall of plays. So It might have something to do with maybe performance and mastery, but what about chess? If it's not increasing intelligence, is it intelligent people that are coming to the
Yeah,
game?
which one is it? Is it that they're intelligent people play chess or chess makes people intelligent?
Absolutely. So, I think that's a great question that the field wants to solve, right? Because it's almost its justification for putting chess into schools, right? If chess is going to improve your mathematics score or your, literacy scores, which it can, it's a tool, it's a medium, and we've seen that through chess evolving from just a sport as an after-school program to now we can use chess as a transversal tool to build other competencies or meeting standards or objectives in other academic domains for children. But is that it? Is it all that chess can really offer? And so, if chess isn't, say, causative of academic performance increase, then it just kind of puts a question mark on the field, which isn't good for business, which is, how great of this or how great is this to, for children to pick up as early as possible. So, there's those abilities we talked about, right? Literacy for children, time management, critical thinking, which the question is, what is critical thinking? What does that look like? But I'm not denoting that chess has its place to build cognition. We have great research on the neuroscience side for dementia and ADHD and depression, but it's very difficult to conduct experimental research on children in an educational setting in a development stage where children are learning from everything. They're learning.
Yeah, it's hard to say whether or not it's the chess that made them that way or if it was just a part of the overall picture. Now, the reason that you're so interested in this is because you're getting a PhD in the education of children vis-a-vis chess. Like, how do you describe
Sort of,
this?
yeah. So I attend Webster University, third year doctoral student. So it's a doctor of education, practice based, but with a dissertation. So it's nice to get some theoretical learning. I'm clearly reading research, which is nice because I'm realizing I know, you know, less than I thought, which is great, right? There's so much literature out there, but my focus, for the field of chess, I helped design a program at the university with some very incredible colleagues, some top level chess names in the field. And um, the purpose of, my own academic journey, right? And trying to fuse it in with chess, my undergrad research on chess, my master's research on chess has led to, at least for myself, using education as a vehicle to complete the projects that I felt was needed in the field. And right now it's culminated to trying to build a higher education path for the field of chess. And it's coming from two angles. It's coming from, well, I'd say three angles because of passion being one of them. Something I wanted to experience, which was to pursue chess in college, outside of sport, but to learn the field. But the two angles is really coming from, first off, we have a lot of chess programs across the US. The US chess is very focused on scholastic programming, K through 12, which goes back to chessboard and some chess in education, which is that transversal tool. And but we don't really have, say, quality control of what these educators know in terms of what they're teaching for these children. So are they teaching chess from just sport? Are they just teaching chess to infuse it into the daily classroom of mathematics and science for STEM? Or are they, you know, trying to teach about the field of chess? So as students are learning how to play the game, they're learning, historical anecdotes of chess players and, you know, uh, political stories between countries and, maybe the more romanticized areas of chess that involve, social and cultural perspectives to help them really understand that, chess is a very global game despite its local application in their school. Um, so that's the one angle, which is developing chess educators specifically who has a background in sport research, education, all these different areas that exist. The second prong, comes to this, and albeit, I mean, it's a terrible visualization, but we're trying to include chess in children's education as young as possible, right? So we talked about earlier, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. As soon as they get into kindergarten, most schools are having some sort of chess club or chess program. But what happens if they develop a very strong affectionate relationship with the game for themselves, and it becomes, say, a bonding tool with their peers, and they grow in skill and performance? Well, their odds of reaching mastery, is pretty slim still. They could become a pretty good chess player, but there's a lot of context that's missing in that path, that journey. But all of them are going to the same point, which is a very long climb, a very steep climb on uh, just this cliff. We're pushing children up to pursue chess. We're saying chess is great for your child, which there's research that shows it. Obviously, there's conflicting research in the field that it may not be as causative as we think, which I'll get to in a minute about some different research. But we're pushing them up for this climb, and this cliff, you know, has a drop off. It's after 12th grade. It's where do they go with chess after they've built such a profound relationship with the game that, there's, based on at least national championships with universities, you're talking less than 70 universities that have a competitive chess team. Many of those universities are not what we would call scholastic, or not scholastic, excuse me, scholarship, programs, which are paying for students to study at that university in a different subject, but be part of the team. And the professional opportunities after that are not very guaranteed. I know for myself, it's been entrepreneurial work, right? Trying to develop skill sets outside of the chessboard that I can bring back to the chessboard and to communities. But if your goal is to learn chess as a sport to increase your performance, you have to really look at both the odds of it, the practicality of building, adult stability of, earning a living, and the educational opportunities that are there after K through 12. So,
So what I'm hearing you say is that the if somebody gets really, really into chess and they start climbing up that mountain and they're going all the way up it, eventually they hit a point where it doesn't really matter if you're really, really good at chess, because the options are become a professional chess player, become a teacher, and how, or I don't know if there's another option in between there, but it seems like you could put a whole lot of effort into mastering something that the energy that is put into that chessboard doesn't create value in the world, so it's hard to derive an income from it.
well, it's up to you to sort of derive that value. So, what do I mean by that? Um, there's definitely benefits from spending so much time mastering or attempting to master and understand anything. I mean, whether it's a sport, whether it's
Painting or drawing or,
painting,
yeah,
drawing, I
database
mean,
management, anything.
somebody who's interested in stock trading, right? Like, I mean, there's the question comes down to is what can you take from it and translate it into other areas of your life? For learning chess for the sake of sport and performing and playing at a master level, clearly there's money at the top level of chess. But, when you look at, say, maybe the top 100 players who are making 30K or more a year from just competition, and there's, say, like 1,600 grandmasters in the world, which is that highest certification level or title level, you know, then you start looking sort of into the context of things. So how are these players making a living? Authorship, right? Developing courses, curriculum, building academies, um, having a day job outside of chess.
This is really similar to, so my wife was a really elite level swimmer, and even got to try out for the Olympics. And we have this tension in raising our daughters because she talks about the value of having mastery, right? of
Yes.
of like, the really being great at something, the experience of what it is to know when you're standing on the blocks, the only people that can be on the blocks with you are people that have put in serious time into going back and forth
They
and
know what it
back and
takes.
forth. And then I sit there and say, well, I like the concept of mastery, but the price of mastery is very, very high. And
It's
that
steep.
I look at like, where was this, how could you apply the lessons there? And you could say, well, the lessons we can apply is I learned work-life balance because I had to both be a student and swim. I learned, how to deal with the nervousness of things. But there's definitely a trade-off because the number of skills that she has are really limited to swimming and then the ancillary things that it taught, as opposed to my kind of renaissance education, of
Yeah.
which mastery came to virtually nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Was it like the jack of all trades, kind
Master of
of.
none,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And that's such a great point. It touching on what is the point of introducing chess to children or pushing for mastery from a parent perspective? I'm
Did your parents, you got good at chess as a young age? Would your parents
so
push you into it?
no, actually, is quite opposite. So first off, I don't have children of my own. But I've gotten to work with so many children as well as their parents in developing, a relationship actually even between them in terms of their chess journey. For myself in learning chess, I first started in fourth and fifth grade. Was introduced to Harry Potter chess, which man, Jeremy Silman, J.K. Rowling, creating that chess scene inspired. I mean, so many people, and for myself. And had they have not, I mean, I don't know that the magic of chess for me would have, been there just to visualize it in a way in which you have such a story arc of not just wizards and magic at a school playing chess, but this idea of sacrificing yourself, a kid sacrificing themselves, which albeit they didn't have to, they could have won the game a move sooner had they sacrificed Harry. But, Harry is, saved by his best friend to continue on his journey, and when you see that kind of storyboard or arc, which, it's language a fourth grader doesn't really understand at that time, but they just see this, incredible story. Man, it was captivating and it really characterized, this two-dimensional, and three-dimensional chessboard to something that's so creative and interactive.
Yeah, instead of it just being like, "Hey, I'm moving these blocks around on the board," that scene in Harry Potter
That
where they're like, "I'm gonna jump out in front of here," and really, the I thought the visual imagery of having the chess pieces fight one another
yes,
probably brought that to life
it
in the
did.
mind of
It
children.
it did. And so, you know, going back to, the question that you had asked about, sort of my journey, where it started with chess and parent support. So I actually had it's funny, it's interesting when, you grow up and maybe there's aspects of your life that you find difficult, right? And but it becomes so normalized for you because it's your experience. So maybe what your experience is, pretty normal. So I actually didn't have the support for chess at that time. I kind of played at school. But chess really wasn't, reintroduced into my life until about high school, ninth, 10th grade by a friend. And um, at that time, I think there was a bit more pressure for me to pursue sports, something maybe more gender based, right? You're a male, and these are kind of like the areas that you should probably be pursuing sports in. And so this idea of kind of like sitting there all day staring at a wooden chessboard, which perceivably doesn't have anything to do with, anywhere else. But it's kind of like as we're having this chess conversation right now, we're impacting, communities outside of this conversation. And I mean, we're here in St. Louis and, you could be playing a game here, but people are watching it, and being, involved and maybe enamored and inspired by just a single game. So for myself, my relationship with chess actually began with that escapism and losing, I mean, well over 1,000 games for more than a year to, my best friend. And um, that journey kind of culminating, from experiencing things at home, having that internal dialogue that I was bringing to the chessboard. And when I finally, got my first draw, so I'd lost thousands of games, right? When I get to that draw, it was by accident from my opponent, in which they were playing blindfold. Go figure. It's not really much of a victory when your opponent, accidentally makes a mistake, but they weren't, looking at the board. But for me, it was obviously about winning the game and trying to figure out what it was that was causing me not to win the game. I mean, take your odds. I mean, even against a world champion, if you play 1,000 games, you should at least be able to win one, somewhere in there or
And it
get a
really you're
draw.
saying that is literal. When you said that originally, I thought you were
Literal,
being
like, well, no,
hyperbolic.
well over 1,000 games. I mean, we played across the whole school year, like every single morning. We were playing anywhere from like 8 to like 15
Man,
games.
there has to be a spring that just like went loose in your brain. To very, very few people
Yes.
can face losing 1,000 games. I think the research shows if you're in a conflict with somebody that's a game, you have to win at least 30%. Otherwise, most people give
Yeah,
up.
absolutely. I think there's context. So, it's funny. Anytime like I think of statistics, I'm like, well, what's not being said here, right? So, wasn't, ridiculed in the process, although, there's definitely trash talk, in chess back and forth. And because there's egos involved in that emotional part of ourselves that want to win. So, for me, I think I was very fortunate, right? Talking about that difficulty of like the home life growing up, um, the difficulties that I had faced were psychological and emotional and sometimes physical. And, at a very age, I mean, 5, 6 years old, I had to sort of figure out that internal dialogue for myself. And I was starting to rationalize that, okay, there's this external experience that I'm facing, right? That I'm not in control of, like at all. And there's a set of rules and guidelines that I kind of have to follow. Otherwise, there's consequences to these. I mean, very drastic ones. But then I rationalized or realized, and children, when you give them, when they take an ACEs test, which is like adverse childhood experiences test. I'm not a psychologist. I'm very much into psychology, especially with chess, especially with internal dialogue that we all have that just is never spoken, right? But it's sometimes coordinated through action. Um, you know, Taking an ACEs test, like scored well beyond, the range of like, okay, this kid is probably troubled, right? And
What kind of questions are on those? How does that even work?
well, it has to do with some of them are, and maybe it's changed since, I was looking at it as an undergrad student in some of the psych courses I was taking, but looking at it, it's more of questions regarding, say, home life experiences. Maybe it has to do with, it could be like parent alcoholism. It could be how the parent is interacting with the child in discipline and things like that, physical abuse, like
And so this is assessing how many things did you as a child have to, how many
endure,
barriers, yeah,
right?
and kind
Exactly.
of like IQ, where it's like, this may not be exactly right, but it's going to give us a proximal measure of how many things this kid
And I
faced.
mean, with any test, right, there's limitations to things, and
Sure.
there's also, right, there's recollection of our memory for what we think we experienced versus maybe what was experienced. But at least in my memory, it was a very difficult, process growing up. And so at that age, I had recognized the difference between, say, you and I are talking, but I have this other me that's in my head. Didn't know what it was, but it was this very freeing feeling of that there was a part of me that was in a sense untouchable, right? This monologue, this thought process, the emotions maybe that I was not able to display outwardly, but I could inwardly. So I've really got to know myself at a very young age. And so as unfortunate, say like as the experiences were, and like I wouldn't wish it on anybody, it was there for me. And I think probably kind of speeding up to my process of going back through, losing so many games and trying to figure out, is this a theoretical problem, not having support maybe to pursue chess, from, parental or home life support, maybe trying to develop faster. It then just became an aha process of like, man, there's so much that's impacting me right now emotionally on this chessboard that, I discuss this a lot about it not being a game, but it was a self-psychotherapeutic tool for me. And before that, it was cross country running, right? Before that, it was another, tool. And there's obviously that line of escapism and then actually being in that flow state, being very present with what you're doing. And that transition point, I think, happened for me in high school a little bit. Then I had recognized, well, if I experience these things and I'm thinking they're normal, they're clearly not normal by any means for what I experienced, with detail. But there's probably other people that are having these monologues, that are having aspects of their life that are just coming into the moves that they're making, how they even like visualize or characterize aspects of the game, such as, identifying the queen, although being the most valuable piece, but something they just can't sacrifice, and seeing it maybe with gender. And, maybe there's, studies and sort of psychological, maybe Freudian, perspectives on chess pieces and so forth of like identifying as the mother and the king as the father and all of these aspects that, you know, are hard to define and research quantitatively. But qualitatively, right? What's the experience of the person at the chessboard? And I think that's where I had made that connection. That's, I think, where that 5-year-old me in coming into a game such as chess, it could have been anything else. I mean, it could have been shoots and ladders, or maybe I could have been just a monster Monopoly player.
Well, I think I like what you're saying in particular around psychology, because I was actually just talking with a good friend of mine, Rob Long, who's a great chess player, who we were talking about our challenges around psychology, right? That somebody will be like, "Hey, I'm going to go talk with somebody." And my question to somebody, if they're going to go see a therapist or a counselor, I always say, "What's their orientation?" And if that person tells you, "Oh, I don't have an orientation, I take from all the fields," I'm always like, "Whoa, whoa, you don't want to go there, because you need to have a hypothesis. You need to have a structure for how does the mind work." And really, once you start digging into that, most of the hypotheses that people have about how the mind works are wrong. But the fact that you have a structure gives you something to play with. Chess actually gives you that structure in a way that's, I think, better than probably most psychological schools.
It's I mean, it goes back to chess being about relationships, right? And the one that's, I think, kind of
Ha!
forgotten is about the relationship with the self, right? And so, if you want to go back to the mastery dialogue, right? If you're wanting, and look, I'm not a guru on psychology. I'm not, a guru in sports psychology. In terms of taking from people, when you start listening to, you know, these people that have demonstrated backgrounds of expertise in psychology and research, and you start listening to it and you're starting to identify with, aspects of it and you're trying to figure out like, how does this apply, in different areas? Um, you start to see that, from maybe a gaming perspective, right? We're very much, in an MMO, right? A massive multiplayer online living experience, but you're still playing an RPG, right? Your daily decisions, your pursuit of mastery, your what you're bringing to the table in terms of your psychology and your experiences in life and how it's impacting that journey for you, it's either stunting you or it's helping you progress. The question is what is it that you've experienced or what is it that you're experiencing in the moment that you're able to leverage to move forward? Look, for myself over the board, I'm still considered an amateur, despite having been involved in chess for 15 years. And I think the best sort of advice I got last fall from, a fellow colleague who plays here at St. Louis Chess Club, incredible player, in the amateur, area of chess, but man, so much wisdom. And he said, because we'd finally gotten to play a game after many years of, talking about playing a game, and it happened to be over the board in a rated event. We were walking, after our game that we played, and he goes, I know you're really worried about trying to improve your chess, here and pursuing mastery, but he's like, I kind of realized for myself that, um, and I wish I could like give, his enthusiasm when he said this, but he was like, man, he's like, if I die being a 1600 rated player, I'm going to be the best 1600 player that, has ever lived. Right. And I'm going to be the best version of me in that. Like, there's no other chess player like me. I think Magnus Carlsen famously said when he was interviewed a few years back, like, who's your favorite chess player? And he just goes, me. I'm my favorite chess player. Now, granted, he's shown the world, even recently giving up the world championship title, not even contending for it. He realizes he doesn't need the title in order to be considered the best in the world, which is what that title would mean. But, going back to that psychology piece, that process piece, how connected are you to yourself and playing the game of chess? And what is translating off the board onto the board? And then what are you taking back off the board? You had mentioned sort of the swimming, the mastery, right? There's obviously a lot of skills that it takes to master swimming. And rightfully so, those skills are being developed outside of the pool. The pool's the easy part. You go in there, you swim, you work out hard, you maybe have some, uh, mindset processes in terms of trying to get through those barriers of like, oh God, I'm so tired, or I'm not feeling my best today. Get in the pool, right? Swim. But after, I think for people who've achieved mastery, those translatable skills, connecting this back to maybe even the research of academic performance, I think we're just looking at it wrong. We're so focused on, comparing students and labeling them as possibly more successful in life because they scored slightly higher on an academic test. Talk about denoting the value that they have as a human being in any other realm outside of that. Maybe it's timing. Maybe it's the teachers that have, degressed them or stunted them. Maybe it's their home life that is impacting their ability to progress. So, I know I'm speaking a lot about this, but there's so many contextualizing factors regarding going back to that monologue, going back to that personal experience in the game of chess that I don't think is talked about enough. And to sort of kind of like end on this little, monologue here about this, there's a book by Sasha Chaplin called All the Wrong Moves. And man, I had spoke to some colleagues about it after I received the book, and I read it just to kind of get some, thoughts about it. And many of them were quite upset with it, kind of like they were quite upset that the fact that there's plenty of research that says we don't know how causative chess is, to justify it in schools. At least from a research standpoint, we can see a child engaging and having fun and things like that. Emotional regulation we can see without testing them, but uh, all the wrong moves was about this guy's journey to pursue chess, as an adult again in life, because I think they were introduced to it, early, and they obviously we talked about the lack of support for children for a longevity in chess. But he comes back to it later, becomes obsessed, and we tend to tell people, you need a balance in life because things may not work out, etc. But a balance doesn't create mastery, right? So you need you need to accept the sacrifices that are going to come from pursuing mastery through obsession. You may be the greatest swimmer or chess player in the world, but your personal life, maybe other aspects of your life just aren't as developed. And you know what? There's no need to judge people for it. It's their life, it's their RPG, it's their, sacrifices that they made to achieve what they wanted. You can't really get both. You have to do one or the other, and then do the other, right? Either set yourself up with security to pursue mastery later in life, or if you had the support, pursue it early to set up a life that you can well round out yourself later in the journey.
Do you think you can do you think you have the full human experience if you've never mastered something?
I don't think anybody gets through life with the full experience.
Okay.
You know, um, you know, tying back to, a quick thing on all the wrong moves there, that book, I recommend everybody to read it because it talks about, you know, the question of, is chess obsession causing negative impacts on life outside of the chessboard? Or is it maybe, as we talked about, the intelligence of people gravitating to chess, is chess providing this realm to unknowingly work on themselves? And so, I think there's definitely questions there that may not, going back to research, it may be very difficult to identify unless it's anecdotal, qualitative, narrative based research to get as many stories as you possibly can, as depth and possible. So going back to this mastery and like sort of full experience in life, I, I think Dr. Peterson talks about, in a lecture, you got to pick your sacrifice at some point. And, I know even for myself, being 18, 19, being homeless for a time period, leaving home, to get out of the situations I was in, to, sort of journey into the world, the messianic years, if you want to call it that, to figure out who I am and what am I going to contribute to the world. Being, almost 30 now, it's like, what a silly question to have at 18 or 19, because you, the context is very different. There's a lot of life experience to even be had. And, and who I am at 30, going back, was somebody who I probably would have dreamed of being. And I'm not where I want to be. I don't think I've experienced the full experience, even just with the process of that I've gone through. I kind of took the approach or the route of, yes, I want chess mastery, and, maybe next year I'll pursue it a bit more when I graduate. But, I had realized there were other elements of chess that, by no means am I an expert in any domain, whether tournament directing or organizing events, but I've done it so much and worked in communities and curriculum writing so much that I found a different value in it. And seeing that value in these communities, seeing lives, transform through it, whether it's people going through AA and building programs in that area, or say chess for vets, senior vets who hadn't played in 30 or 40 years and came back to the game and had apprehension, because chess is an intellectual game. Um, and just seeing sort of this, experience come back to these people almost as if they're childlike, who went out into the world to gain more experiences beyond the board. Like there's way more life experience outside of chess. And, I think there's a quote of probably Paul Morphy, one of the greatest American chess players ever. And other chess players who've basically said, you know, to master chess or be good at chess is a wasted life, because there's all of these other experiences that, maybe we define as like culturally important that get missed out, or say, um, what's the word? Maybe traditionally or ritualistically or even tribally that we experience, here in the US when you're 17, 18, that's kind of the sign of, you're on your path on your own. You go to college, mom and dad are kind of there, but, maybe not so much there anymore. And so we have these, sort of milestones in life that, for this full experience, right? In the context of our own little world, here in the US or somewhere else in St. Louis, versus say maybe in India, or say, Mongolia, or some of these other areas that, you know, are developed, but then, differently developed with different practices, different context to what a full life is.
It's funny that I've spoken with a few chess people. One of them, whom is the president of Webster University, Julian Schuster.
Yes, yes, big
So
supporter of
he
chess.
and I have had some great conversations, but multiple times he said something that's really similar to what you're saying, which is, "Hey, people that are really engaged in chess, there's more to life than chess." And I think to the guy that's driving his truck right now from one place to another, this seems obvious to him, right? It's like, of course, like who could live their life around this chess? What is it about the game that becomes so encompassing that the people that are like you or Julian that are close to it realize, like, wait a second, there's a black hole here, and you got to be a little bit careful.
You know, uh, what's funny about that black hole is, I mean, sometimes you get out of it, right? I know for myself, I was obsessed. I was definitely addicted to chess, like in high school, so much so that, you know, I I wanted to be done with education, right? I was showing up to classes, my work done ahead of time, sitting there playing chess. This abyss that I had kind of jumped into, fell into, right? Because it was a form of escapism and then internal dialogue. It was that tool that, we discussed, to where I'm sitting in class, teachers are then, upset that, I'm pulling out a chessboard in class, while they're giving a lecture, which as a professor now I kind of understand. But, you know, for me as a student, I was like, well, I already did the work. I'm ahead, like I'm ready for the exam. Give it to me today, right? Um, I'm living for chess at this point, as a teenager. And, going back to, Sasha's book about all the wrong moves, I mean, he went into the black hole as an adult, which had a very different experience in terms of, health effects and mental health or physical effects and what he was willing to maybe endure, right, to pursue chess over in India, and going to some of the most remote places to play chess at the cost of his health, getting sick and so forth. And so,
What do you think that pulls people in? It'd be very rare if we were sitting here talking about your shoots and ladders obsession, you would be a crazy person, right?
right? Well, I mean, it's contextual, right? So for me, like I definitely, had mine the escapism, and then obviously finding that it was its own world in itself. Maybe I was a master of that world, right? Maybe the accountability for the good and the bad, that occurred. For somebody else, I mean, maybe it's imitation, right? Maybe they saw a chess celebrity, say Bobby Fischer, who, created a big, chess boom in the 70s, beating Soviet chess against all odds and pretty spectacularly as well. Incredible games to, inspiring a generation in the 70s, from the 60s and 70s to pursue it and sort of maybe because they play chess, overcome odds in life, outside the board. And so I don't really know that I can speak to, everybody's experiences. I do know that many of them, when I talk to my students or say even those parents who are interested in possibly pushing their kids into that cliff and maybe that black hole's, on the other side, because there's really not too many places to go at the moment, outside of entrepreneurial work. But, it's, it's a really, I think it's a really great question, what pulls them in, but it might go back to what are the stereotypes, right, that are with it? Well, chess is going to make you smarter. Well, if you believe that and you play chess, do you feel smarter?
Probably.
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
probably.
so, it's
And if you're
very,
just smoking every kid in your high school, like, and this is giving
yeah,
you a either a reputation or an internal feeling that
sure.
you're able to put
I
yourself
mean,
up.
you're
I mean,
you're the king,
yeah.
right? On the board and clearly now off the board. I mean, even if people are like, "Oh, you're a nerd," or "You're that chess guy,"
Yeah,
you're
but
like, "You know
you
what? I
can't beat
am
me in
that chess
chess, right?
guy."
Yeah, like you can say whatever
Exactly.
you want, but I can still win.
Exactly, and so, I think that might also have a little bit of play in there, which is, why are we choosing to do the things that we do? And, you know, I think another area of like psychology, like I'm very interested in is identity, and from the idea of how, like, from what identity are we labeled with? What identity do we label ourselves with? And, what about it is, are we making decisions and choosing behavior through because it aligns with it, because it feels good, because like we know ourselves, or because you've demonstrated maybe expertise in an area, so then you've fixated to that, because maybe, for example, it's funny, Alan Watts, incredible lecturer in the 60s and 70s, going around to universities discussing Eastern and Western philosophy and religion. And he has this really great lecture on the real self and identity. And and he basically tells the students that the person standing before them is not the real Alan Watts. It's the Alan Watts that gets paid to do what Alan Watts knows and does here, but he's definitely not the Alan Watts who goes home, and he's definitely not the Alan Watts who goes and does something else in life. And so I think, on one hand, there is the benefit of, right, getting some quick expertise or mastery, or finding strength in a domain that aligns with maybe values and characteristics you have. Maybe people telling you you're really smart and you're really good, right? I mean, that feels good. I want to do more of it, of course, right? Because it's validation, even if maybe you lost the meaning in what you're doing, but now you must be doing something right because people like you. Well, I think, if you, with the labeling, aspect, and maybe some of that validation, where is it coming from, externally or, internally? Um, that voice that comes with it, I think could be some context as far as the attraction of chess, right? The labeling of being smart, the labeling being of, for example, if I'm, you know, say I'm going to the gym and I'm working out and I've got a great routine and my nutrition's on point and, it's like I'm a bodybuilder, right? And it sounds good, it feels good, right? And then what about those moments or those days in which you don't feel good? What's your label then, right? How do you feel about yourself? Do you have still the same heightened sense? What about when you compete, right? You're stepping into the arena to put yourself to, possibly humble yourself to your knees, in humiliation, in checking that ego to lose. I mean, there's only first, second, and third place. We kind of understand every other place is participation at that point. And obviously there's one champion, there's one winner. What do you do in those moments? How do you feel about yourself? What do you label yourself as now? Are you a loser? Are you somebody who, isn't smart enough to play chess? So I think going back to that, abyss, that poll, there's a reason as to why that pull is there. I don't know what that reason is for everybody, but I know plenty of people who have left chess because of the negative aspects of it, which is that obsession quickly sets in. And and we see it, for example, even at the most shallow of levels on this conversation, which is bullet chess, right? There's a lot of ego involved when you play chess, right? The trash talking, I'm going to win, like I'm going to beat you down, I'm the better chess player. And in bullet chess,
What is bullet chess?
bullet chess is like 1 minute, 2 minute type games on the clock. You might see that usually in like chess hustling parks, like over in DC or things like that, where you can find videos on YouTube of, just people kind of egging each other back and on, and it's part of the culture. Is it part of sportsmanship? Kind of hard to teach kids. Yes, it's part of it, and or no, it's not. But but with bullet chess, for example, it's very high speed, right? You're trying to finish a game within a minute to 2 minutes, where we see people sit for hours, 6, 7 hours at the top level playing a game. Going back to the question, is this really worth it? I've got other things to do in life, pick up the kids, or it's time away from the family, all these things. But with bullet chess, it's part of playing chess, right? Going back to the emotions, there's the physiological responses. When you're worried, you're scared. You have anxiety, which is also very similar to excitement. Increased heart rate. You kind of feel the little jitters. Um, and with bullet, because you're under so much time pressure, you're moving so quickly, you're thinking so fast, you're trying to get into like a very quick flow state of find a move, find a tactic, make a move, etc. It can become very, very addicting. And you play one game, you're like, again, 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 right? When you lose, or for some people, they're like, I'm done, like the loss was enough, um, and so I think depending on the relationship that like students, or at least, students that I coach, are involved with, or even maybe lifelong learners, um, you know, there's different types of obsessions there. And I think one part of it is the ego in terms of trying to get that win, trying to get that label. And then the other side of it, is probably much more primitive, which is I want to win, and and I think when you kind of take a step back, at least my approach to chess is like, I'm competing this Sunday with the team. Of course, my job is to win like every single game I possibly can. But what about those moments in between, that I'm experiencing? How am I keeping myself in check? How am I labeling myself in the process, or viewing myself? Am I, being a bad teammate for losing 3 games in a row, which happened this past weekend? But then I checked myself, I won the next 4 in a row, right? Very contextual things in all of those games. But um, going back to that poll with the abyss, I think part of it's the ego, part of it's and with the self, with the labeling, with the external views on chess. Um, and it's not to denote the love or the passion for the game. I mean, but you can hate things just as much as you love them. And we hear that it's a love-hate relationship.
Speaking of love-hate relationships, you do the education, you talked about interacting with kids and their parents and parents' role in teaching chess. What have you observed about the way that parents and children interact, both positive and negative?
Sure. Um, I mean, the very first thing that I include, especially when it's like the first chess lesson for a child, is I get some time in that lesson to talk with the parents, with the child there, because um, a child's vision may not be the same for the parents, right? If the parents is spending a few $100 a month for chess lessons, and obviously their goal or their vision is for that child to win, to improve, they want to see it, they want to see trophies and things like that. um, more maybe the tangible stuff right there. The child maybe is just like, I have an interest in chess. I want to play. I want to beat my friends at school, and I want to have fun. Um, so regarding the support, of parents, I'm very interested in what kind of support is there regarding chess as like an extracurricular activity. Are they able to get them chess books? Are they able to include make sure they have daily study time, for chess? Or is it just they come for the chess lesson once a week? There's very different results from that. So, looking at the support, we're trying to identify things that the parent is involved. They're willing to take them to chess tournaments. They're willing to say invest in the coach beyond just that coaching lesson, such as having the coach available in between rounds to check on this, the student, to maybe even do a little homework on their upcoming opponents. Say, hey, they play this. We haven't looked at this before, but make these first six moves, and you should be pretty good here. Preparation. So it's a relationship. Going back to this idea, chess is relationships, and as a coach, it has to be a relationship if it's with the child, with also the family. So that's from the support side of it, which is the resources, the time, making sure their vision is being met, but also that the child's vision can grow. And also, I mean, I have a vision as well, right? I mean, I know my job is to be hired and teach them chess, but I also have, right, the practical experience of, okay, I've got 15 years in this field. I haven't seen everything, but I've seen enough to see kind of what works and what doesn't, what sort of kills the passion in chess for children, what, kills the vision for parents, in terms of coaching and lessons. So
And what is that? What kills it in children, and how is it different from what kills it in
I,
parents?
I think for the children, it goes back to the language piece. It's no longer a conversation in the lessons. It's the sit down and listen, while I teach you about this theoretical concept. There are some children that, benefit from that, but the one issue is we see that within the education system, right? When we talk about standardized curriculum, we talked, about, sort of the Laszlo experiment, which his idea was like schools are not, really prepped to handle students who are sort of excelling, outside of maybe the normalcy or the average student. And
Laszlo is Laszlo Polgar, who
Polgar,
is
yes,
Susan Polgar's father,
yes,
who wrote a
yes,
book. So Susan Polgar was the person that Julian Schuster brought into Webster University
yes,
to help bring their chess program to prominence, which became one of the best chess teams
absolutely.
in the
I
entire
mean,
world.
yeah,
And her father wrote a book on how do you make geniuses.
yes,
And he believed, he had a hypothesis, this is how you make geniuses. And as far as you can tell from his children,
all successful.
they are all successful.
Yes, and I mean, not even just successful in terms of, performance in chess, but, areas of chess outside of it, dimensions outside of it. Now, granted, there is a, you know, tailoring off point, which is that accountability piece, right? Which is cool, you're really great at chess, but what are you going to do about rounding your life out and developing other skills? I think the earlier we can sort of develop those skills in children, say leadership opportunities, to say start coaching peers, to start organizing club events, right? And K through 5. I mean, there's so many opportunities here, to develop that are missed. So going back to, Susan Polgar, who, her vision for Webster University was to build this chess minor. And there's actually a bit of a story in terms of how, I got involved with this project. But, um, going back to that support piece, he clearly had support for his children. he was very invested in bringing them to tournaments. I mean, over 30, 40 different countries playing in chess tournaments, as children, the mom, and obviously this is, not just from conversations with Susan. We haven't talked much about, these areas, but they've been written about and so forth anecdotally. And I would think if some of them weren't true, there'd probably be, lawsuits, but I think with, some of the stories that have been shared about it, you see the right stuff. This question, it's funny going back to the book, the right stuff, like, for an astronaut, like what's the right stuff for children and chess or learning? It starts with support at home. If the home life is broken, if there's a lack of resources, if there's a lack of, say, environmental opportunities, or just not in a good chess area, right? Or they don't have, the right contacts, like it's very difficult to then instill in the child, a very specific discipline to be able to afford it and then support it, long term. So, Susan, and her sisters had that support at home, right? And beyond home. And fortunately for Laszlo, I think he was smart enough to look at the education system and say, like, this ain't it. You know, eh, if you go through the system, you're going to come out the system just pretty much at the same place as most people if you don't do anything spectacular through it. So it's kind of like telling an undergrad student, go to school, get a degree, you'll be successful. And it's like, it's a piece of paper. It does show some time that you spent, in certain areas that, a little bit more in, but what'd you do during your time? Did you internship? Did you build a cool product? What did you do that differentiated you, that built other skill sets other than you're a good student? So coming back to it, you know, they had the right stuff in terms of that support for chess. The where the support I think goes wrong, not in their situation, but in many parent situation, is their vision, their expectation, where a parent can be overbearing in terms of the development, of their child. For example, we can see it as, say, hovering over their child's chess game at a tournament. That's a lot of pressure. I mean, even if a child has a good relationship, with their parent, children want to please parents, right? That's kind of like what we're taught. Like the people that you please around you, the better, maybe the social kudos or the social currency that comes with it, right? You're helping other people, they're helping you. Otherwise, what's the point of a community, a society, right? Trying to build that survival, life experience. So going back to,
Well, as a
yeah,
parent, I can see children develop this. My 2-year-old is just now beginning to understand that her little sister has feelings. So if you bite her, she's going to cry. If mom is upset, right? Mom's going to have these emotions, and that's going to reflect back to her. She's just at the very, very beginning of the psychosocial thing. But I can imagine, and I'm trying to make as many observations as I can before she has it. Because right now she's actually just a ball of her own emotion and her own looking out in the world. But as she gains it, you could see a parent being very tempted to want to hijack that. Oh, she really cares what I think of her. So I could get her to cooperate by manipulating how much she sees about me being disappointed or angry
yes.
or sad or really happy, and having this child not have that internal compass of like what's right for me, but instead be fully oriented towards what do my parents think I should be doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem we all face, right? And it kind of comes down to like that dialogue piece, like when does the child have it? But also, from the parent perspective, who is it? I think it's Kerwin Ray who talks a lot about. He's, a speaker. He talks a lot about relationships and parenting, and even his moments of uh, coercion or manipulation of, or even emotional outbursts that affects, the child's perception of, interacting in the world, and sort of reducing their um, courage to explore the world, to make mistakes in the process. And I think we also, and I mean, say we, I mean, I'm not a parent, but I was a child right? So, you know, I think one thing that is critical, and this goes back to part of my coaching philosophy with those, 4 and 5 and 6 year olds with that literacy piece is not labeling them as a good or bad chess player as a student, but helping them realize they're an individual. And, their path, as much as we want to pretend it's set in stone because they've been introduced at a young age, which we know that children introduced to a technical area to expertise or master that area at a young age, their chances of mastering it are higher because they have very different life responsibilities. The support that they would need, say, as an adult to pursue professional chess, you have to figure it out on your own, more or less. How
Oh,
are you
and they're
gonna,
just sponges. I mean, my daughter can
Yeah,
pick up words, I can't even believe. And
absolutely.
if I were picking up language as fast as she is and simultaneously learning how to do somersaults in just a single day, children are just wired for that.
They are, and I mean, as far as, cognitive development, sure, there's a little bit of cutoffs at certain developmental stages of what should be achieved and so forth that might impact the next. But, we're still kind of forming our brains. I mean, up to 30, and so, how unfortunate is it to tell a student or your child, like, remove them from chess lessons or some activity because they're just not good enough right now? And talk about the implications that you've created, say, as a parent or even as your own self, labeling yourself, mislabeling yourself with a very short term outlook on like what your capabilities are. And so, for me at least, the sooner I can help the student realize that this journey is really 90% them studying, annotating their games, helping them build skill sets to um, build confidence or self-efficacy in this area, and obviously outside that area too. If you, I think if you build that mastery or confidence, there is some translation that you know your self-efficacy is probably going to be a little bit higher. There's a lot of research studies done in the 60s and 70s between Dr. Bandura, who was very interested in performance. How do people feel about themselves from one area of mastery? And we'll call it intelligence, right? Intelligence, maybe that requires specific skill sets to be intelligent in that area, pattern recognition, memory recall. So, how not only how does the skills translate to other dimensions, but more importantly, you know, what translates about themselves into it. And so, from a lot of studies that were conducted and sort of redefining what self efficacy was, your sense of self and your abilities developed into this concept of agency. It's part of my theoretical framework for my dissertation currently. And looking at chess educators, how can we build confidence and self efficacy in them to teach in different domains? But, your agentic self, your sense of self, if you master swimming, can you take that mastery over to chess? Well, for example, without research being done, we see a very successful story, albeit probably between overburdening support as well as a high sense of agency. Josh Waitzkin, probably one of the most famous American players. That's who Searching for Bobby Fischer was based on. Incredible chess story of uh, prominent youth, and there was better chess players at his age, but his story was really incredible how he was excelling at chess scholastically, had support, at home, right? His father, really pushing for chess. He had some of the greatest coaches that were pushing for chess, as you see in the movie, um, and in the book, and but pushing so hard for him to become the next Bobby Fischer, of the U.S. He quit. He's got some interviews. He can talk much more eloquently about his own life story, than I can. But um, it's like a decade later, he becomes a world champion in Tai Chi after quitting chess, after achieving some level of mastery in chess, and finding how chess translates over into this area, and then sort of looking at what is it? I think he's got a book called, The Art of Learning, where he talks about the transference of um, key areas, from one domain to another, but also being careful that just because you have mastered a domain doesn't necessarily mean you're capable of mastering another. There's still deliberate practice, which research shows it accounts, at least in chess, for maybe 30%, of your progress, which is a lot, but then it's not, right? It's kind of like you can only help yourself so much. And then what's the context of that? So having that right support, say in the domain of coaching and the domain of parent support and the domain of yourself, I mean, is really important. But those negative prospects of pushing too hard, I mean, I unfortunately beat a 6-year-old child in a tournament which I actually was proud about. I had some ego in because I was like, I just lost to an 8-year-old the round before. I'm gonna crush the 6-year-old. And and it was a back and forth game. Anyways, the parent was hovering, and I was already coaching at this time. So I was like, this is to my benefit right now, right? Please keep hovering, right? For me, but I knew it was bad, for the child. The child lost the game. And, I was excited. I got my point. I moved up in rating. He, walks out, the hall, and he's kind of stoic, in the face. And I walk out there and he's backed up against the wall, like just terrified. His dad is in his face, yelling with his finger in his chest. And I was like, I kind of want to tear up right now because it's like, you possibly just destroyed not even just this kid's future in chess and love for the game. Like, you just destroyed their confidence, their trust in you. I mean, as a parent. And now that they want to please you, going back to that, right? Sort of what's the right stuff, for children. It's not it. I mean, you don't even have to conduct research on that. You just look at it and you're like, it's one thing, if your child messed up and you're trying to like convey to them, in some capacity, but it was a game. At the end of the day, it was a game. And when we go back to that abyss, right, the negatives that could possibly be from it, or even the abyss of having to, as soon as you come off that cliff of K through 12, you've got to figure chess out for yourself. You know, just talk about, you can't undo that action. And so, I remember just walking out of there, like, even for myself, feeling so guilty because I was like, I should have thrown the game, right? Illegal in US chess to do, but, you know, then it's like, why are we, it goes back to that question, like, why did you sign your child up for this tournament? Because you wanted them to win, because you wanted your chess lessons or your investment to pay off. But thinking about that chess research, are we programming specifically to improve their academic scores? Is that really the goal that we're getting at here? Is the goal to help them achieve mastery and sacrifice so many other beautiful things to experience in life? I mean, talk about, for some, having a family, or just, for those who can find like the appreciation and beauty in life in these other domains that simply just playing at the chessboard can't measure up to. But also, I mean, life can't measure up to what happens, for yourself at the chessboard. So it, man, I mean, it's
So
back
if
and
you
forth.
are a parent, you're out in the middle of Utah, right? And there's not a lot of chess programs around. What do you think a parent should do to get their child acquainted and, you know, oriented up the rock face?
I mean, it's difficult, right? So I didn't grow up in an environment where chess, was. I mean, I was born in the US, lived in Spain for a few years as a child, and then, grew up in Texas through, a divorced family and things like that. And I grew up in a little town, but major port, Beaumont, Texas. And there wasn't a lot of chess other than maybe at a cafe. So scholastic chess just wasn't a thing. So, I mean, what's funny is like Utah, has a state affiliate with US Chess. They actually have chess programs there and stuff. There are remote places in states that, just, aren't as robust for opportunity. I think with the advent of chess online, obviously there's a lot of drama in chess now, with recent ethical concerns. 2 years ago, we had the COVID boom. So chess streaming and playing chess online was a big thing. So access has definitely changed. Um, and I think it's been a really beautiful thing because now, through, say, companies or organizations like Chess Kid or some, shout out to, friends, that I know that are coaches running like, Pal's Chess Academy or Premier Chess, in New York and Denver and all these incredible places that, are heavily populated that there's just not enough access for. Man, online chess is, it's the bee's knees, getting children, the opportunity to build technological skills like we talked about earlier, navigating websites, doing annotation, literacy skills, being able to make friends, right, in other states, at other schools, and other programs. You know,
Where do you play
it's
your
it's
online
magic.
chess? Are you on Lee Chess?
Yeah, off and on. Lee Chess, I mainly just coach through there now.
So Lee Chess is an open source chess.
Open source website. It's free. I think you can become a patron or something, but I mean, I use it for their study features with my students, so I can use an interactive board, have them import games. I can draw arrows, and they can see the arrows, and they'll stay there for them to go review. And really, the tools just kind of, it has to match like what the student needs. I mean, if students are more interested in chess.com or chess kid, depending on how they're learning, that's fine. I've got students that adult students who are very against technology, in the sense of computers and chess engines and so forth. So they're more interested in a phone call, and having that phone call. It's almost like, I mean, we just, with the age difference, I kind of feel like, like, hey, grandpa, like, how you doing this week and stuff. And it's more of a relationship there. And they just want to play over the board, right? Just speaking out the moves over the phone. And now, I'm working, gosh, I feel like I'm working in so many areas of chess. It's great, but there's so many things developing so fast where, I mean, it's even, like text based coaching now, where it's just, maybe you send some videos, but, uh, it's kind of like check-ins here and there. And
And are you coaching now?
oh yeah, I'm coaching in different domains. So I coach for my own business in Texas. I coach for another company, Better Ed Corporation, who actually is a tech company involved with like software development and educational learning and like piano and music and chess. So I'm working for them now, and then so I'm not coaching at Webster, but I'm sort of coaching in the sense of
Well,
coaching.
you're playing at
I'm
Webster,
playing
right?
at Webster though,
Yeah.
yes, and which is helping my coaching absolutely. I'm very fortunate to from Susan really advocating for me. I mean, there's actually a story of how I even ended up at Webster, and I say ended up because you never know where you're going to end up in life. But to at least close out the coaching aspect of it, you know, um, I don't just coach chess from sport, right? Obviously, I'm coaching for social emotional learning. I'm coaching for other life skills for these students to build their sense of agency. And at Webster, I mean, I'm not coaching, but I'm now a professor, of a course that I built as an undergrad student for like my vision of what chess at, the higher ed level would look like. And I, got to meet, Susan's vision with it and adjust, these different courses and program to, a conversation that other experts like, Susan's expertise in the field of education with her foundation and not even just college chess, but scholastic chess, I mean, is unrivaled. I mean, even her sister is working internationally with, education and coaching. And so for my own coaching, I mean, I feel very small, very humble, sort of in the field. But
What is a chess coach? What are the various levels that I mean, is this a $15 an hour thing? Is this $100 an hour? Like, how does that work?
it's entrepreneurship. So here's the thing. I don't think, I know there's a conversation of, separating, the person from the art, in different conversations of dialogue. But I think in some things, you can, and some things you can't. And, I wear a coach hat, right? I wear a professor hat. I wear a curriculum writer hat, author hat, like there's so many things that, you know, come with me. So answering the sort of this question of like what levels there are and sort of what kind of pay is there in the field, you know, uh, you have FIDE, which is the International Chess Federation. They have their own FIDE trainer, which is like their coaches, system. With the US, there's 5 levels. I'm also on the US Chess Coach Committee. So we're actually revamping the coaching system and what a coach actually is because it's been focused on scholastic. And we're like, well, it's half our membership. What about the other half, right? What about vulnerable populations? Or do we develop certifications for those? So there's 5 levels. I think it's like local, is it local, district, advanced, national, and professional, somewhere in there. I'm at level 3 advanced, waiting on national for that. And they have different requirements and stuff. They don't suggest any pay with it, but the whole point of the coach certification program in the US, and the reason I'm talking about US chess is because it's really, I mean, it's a national chess governance entity, right, that has identified 3 professional paths in the field of chess sport. National Masters, you get a title for that. You're seen as a professional chess player, even if you're not making maybe an income from it, you're at that level. Tournament directors, there's paths for that, who are those who put on chess competitions for those to enjoy. And then there's the coaches. Now, FIDE has more domains, but with the coaches, it's really going to depend on what you put. So I know plenty of people who are grandmasters. I mean, the highest chess mastery title you can get, aside from world champion, and they're charging like $10 an hour. No benefits, mind you, right? And $10 an hour, I mean, you get what you pay for in a sense. Many of them will just play you in a game, crush you, show you what you did wrong. That's it. Some actually develop curriculum for you. So, planning for a chess lesson could take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on where they're at, what they need, for that week. And so now you're talking about them making $5 an hour, and if they have a business structure, maybe they're paying taxes or maybe it's under the table, you know. Um, Case in point is it's not very lucrative at that per hour cost. What's the phrase, like keep your day job, But then there's amateurs, and I know even for myself that, I won't work under a certain threshold. And it's like, well, that's not fair. And it's like, what do you mean it's not fair? I set my price, right? And what comes with it is a specific set of value, both from the coaching side, right? If I mean, the whole point is if I'm coaching you, I should be coaching you, giving you resources, helping you develop so that I am out of a job. If I'm not trying to get out of a job with you, I am not. I'm trying to think of the best word to use here, but I would be using you as a client. I
It's
get.
like the chiropractor that just wants to have a patient come back every week as opposed to resolving their problem so that like come back when you have a new problem.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, you can't really do this at home. It's not really going to be beneficial. And you try to find holistic ideas to maybe fix your health through nutrition or diet, stretching, that kind of stuff. Preventative care, right? Before, you go when there's a problem,
Mm-hmm.
but you should, and I know some of them will give you some preventative care kind of exercises to do at home, but, the machine has to keep running.
So if people found what you were saying today really interesting and they wanted to get a hold of you, where would they go?
Sure. So, Quest for Chess is my company, and if there's anybody that's interested in web development, I'm definitely looking for a web developer. But questforchess.com, and really what that kind of stemmed from, uh, this idea, working in different areas of chess right now.
Well, man, I was really excited to have you come in. To talk about children and chess and the way it works, and we jumped into areas I had no idea about. So, Jonathan Singler of Quest for Chess, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, and yeah, anytime you want to learn chess, let's get a lesson in.